Hey, welcome to episode 122 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman. What you're hearing is even though I live in South Dakota, I don't possess a Midwestern accent. I possess what's called a speech impediment. The title of today's episode is Inclusive Abundance. You know, we humans seem to like variety a lot. We don't want to be bored. We want to see new shows on TV and on and on. But yet at the same time, sometimes around people we perceive that are different than us in some way, we get nervous, and this is my gesture for nervous. And we stop making assumptions, and we kind of back away sometimes. Um, my guest today is not only inviting us conceptually to think of life and people in a new way, but he's taken extraordinary action towards helping a whole group of people be included. I'm excited to introduce him, but first,
today's guest, James Emmett.
hi, welcome back to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. Let me tell you a little about this amazing person. James is founder and CEO of James Emmett Company. His company is one of the most recognizable brands in the field of disability inclusion. James has worked on many of the most visible disability inclusion initiatives with well-known companies including Walgreens, Best Buy, Office Depot, Office Max, and Pepsi. I mean, well-known companies. He has helped plan and execute initiatives that have resulted in over 100,000 jobs for people with disabilities. 100,000 jobs. I have trouble even counting that high. Just kidding. Well, maybe I'm not sure. James' career vision is to forever change the business and in disability communities by helping prominent companies create disability inclusion brands. And he has given hundreds of presentations on disability inclusion all over the world. Please help me welcome James Emmett.
Hi, Jason. That was an awesome introduction.
Actually, I'm sorry to correct my guess, but actually it was awkwardly awesome.
Fair enough.
Thanks for being here. Where are you hailing from today?
Yeah,
I
my pleasure.
haven't said the word hailing for so long. Hailing.
That's a good one. Yeah, so it's nice to be here, Jason. I am actually in Monticello, Indiana today in my home office.
Nice. So should we start right off? I guess we have.
Bet.
So it's natural when we haven't personally experienced something to have misconceptions. What are some common misconceptions people have about men and women who have disabilities?
Jason, I think that's a great question. I really can talk, I think, especially from the employment standpoint, right? With the companies out there. And I think the first misconception that we always come into is that people with disabilities can't perform the jobs that we're targeting at, right? That somehow people with disabilities are less than some of the other recruiting sources. And the conception is, or that people with disabilities can only do a certain set of jobs, right? That's right. That's the first and foremost myth. I think a couple of the other myths that we run into are people with disabilities are going to get hurt doing work, right? That they get hurt more frequent than people without disabilities, and that if we fire somebody with a disability, we're going to get sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Those are some of the misconceptions that we come into when we're working with businesses.
Let me back up a minute. It continually amazes me how broad, like disabilities cover such a wide gamut of human experience. How would you describe the expanse of different disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, it's we get asked that a lot, right? What is the definition of disability? And we really go by the Americans with Disabilities Act definition, which is very wide, right? It is very wide. But it really typically for us is defined as somebody who has an impact or an impairment in one of life's major areas, right? So that's from a workplace standpoint, the definition we go to. But Jason, I really like the definition that they use in Europe mostly of the talking about disability more as a mismatch between the person and the environment, right? So not only putting it on the person, but putting on the environment. That's actually my favorite definition. And sometimes I think in America, we're a little bit short-sighted on how we look at disability.
Say more about the European definition, like a mismatch.
Yeah, the folks in many of based on the Congress on the rights perspective, right, is really a lot of the European countries look at disability as the person not fitting, quote unquote, fitting or matching with the environment. But the thing that I love about that definition is, right, it's not putting deficits, right? When we talk about disability, in America, we always talk about deficit, right? When we talk to a lot of Europeans, we're talking about the fact that it's the environment, it's society that doesn't have the tools, right, or doesn't create the supports to match what a person needs. And that's what I love, right? Making accessibility just a part of everyday culture. I like some of the European countries driving towards that instead of, again, always looking at it from a deficit perspective, which is what we typically do in the United States.
And that's such an optimistic definition too, because the environment can be changed and adapted to meet a person.
Yep, exactly.
Saying that, what would you say to a person with a disability about their responsibility in that equation? In terms of showing up to use the accessibility.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's, as a person with a disability, I think it is our responsibility to be able to communicate what we need, right? And be able to, we have lived with ourselves, right? And so we know what are the supports that we need in a given situation. And so, but sometimes, again, we shy away from advocating for ourselves and communicating that. The other thing that I think from an employment standpoint that's really important, that for the job seekers with disabilities that are listen to your podcast, one of the advice pieces I would give is focus on your strengths, right? I think we've been taught in the disability community in schools, we've always got to talk about the accommodations that we need, right? And we forget all the strengths that we as people bring to the table, right? So it's important to communicate what you need in an environment and the supports that are going to work, but don't forget about your strengths, right? Don't forget about what you do well and being able to communicate those and express those as well.
I know there's been times in my life where I've been like, I'm sorry, I have a speech impediment, and that's tempting to do. And there's also been times in my life, more times than I want to admit, where I've used my speech impediment and my coordination differences almost as a crutch to say I couldn't do certain things when really I was afraid of trying them and failing or whatever.
And that's fair, right? I mean, and I've done the same thing. I know a lot of people with disabilities who do as well, right? And it's hard because sometimes I think in the disability community, we're so driven to succeed because people expect failure, right? That sometimes we don't even try. But yeah, I think to your point, right? Look at the impact you're having. Look at the words. Look at how you are impacting our community, right? By getting out there and trying, and that's important.
Okay. What if I came to you, I'm kind of wanting a job, but saying, James, I've tried for jobs before and I've been rejected because of my disability. I don't want to try anymore to find a job. What would you say to me or the hypothetical person? I guess it's me in this example, but I'm using a never mind.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I think that what I would do is try to understand what have been some of the reasons for that failure. You say, right, that it's because of your disability, and so I want to understand a little bit more about that. But again, what I would focus on are a couple things. I would focus on, what are your interests, right, Jason? In this case, where do you want to work? What do you want to do? What's your passion? And then what are the strengths that back up those interests, right? And that's how we build our career plan. And we'll worry about the accommodations and the things that are needed after that. But we're going to build a career plan based on your interests and based on your strengths, and then we're gonna go after it that. And I think that it's such a difficult place right now because more and more companies are starting to understand disability, but it's a slow journey, right? I'd love to say, Jason, that every company you go out there, when you disclose your disability, they're going to give you a fair shot, but it's not the truth, right? But we are getting more and more companies who are starting to understand. So part of that career plan, after hearing about your strengths and interests, I may also direct you to some companies that I know have worked on building disability inclusion into their training for their human resource and operations staff.
So there's a variety of steps, which sounds awesome. Speaking about companies, what if you get a meeting with a company that has a fairly underdeveloped inclusion policy at the moment, or a no inclusion policy, is downright resistant. How would you, what would you say to them at first?
So with most of our companies, right, we want them to understand that disability inclusion is a continuous journey to get better and better. It's not one destination. It's the stepwise. What we try to do, Jason, is really understand what is the fear and the stigma behind a company and the individuals that work at the company. Why do they stereotype disability? Why do they think disability won't work, right? Because what we've seen in the business world is a lot of times when companies are known to not be very disability inclusive, sometimes disability advocates will go in and kind of scream the company down, but ultimately that doesn't change behavior, right? What we have found will change behavior to help companies be more inclusive is to listen. What have been the barriers? Listen to them on what their concerns are, and then be able to build a plan that addresses those fears, addresses those stigma, and then also helps them see the business case, right? There is so much business case of disability inclusion that's one of the things we want our business partners to hear.
What is the not the, well, it's the right thing to do, it's the good thing to do, but what is the nuts and bolts business case for disability inclusion?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we don't want, if you're an owner of a company, we don't want you to do it because it's the nice thing to do or it's the right thing to do, right? We want you to do it because people with disabilities are a still relatively untapped labor market, a talent source, right? So what's the business case? First and foremost, every study out there shows that people with disabilities turn over less than their counterparts, right? People with disabilities have proven to be incredibly loyal employees who don't job jump, right?
And what is the reason for this?
It's a variety of different reasons, right? That is a great follow-up question, right? I think for some folks with disabilities, they've been through so many struggles and barriers to get to an employer who understands their needs. They don't necessarily want to jump, right? And that stinks, right? Because every employer should be disability inclusive and people should be able to move wherever but that's part of the reality. I think the other part of the reality, there's lots of parts, but another part of the reality for me is our community tends to be just a generally loyal community, right? Where if you're loyal to us and you make an effort for us, whether that's as an employee or a customer of a business, we tend to stick with you, right? But if you anger us, we tend to stick against you, right? As a business or as a company. But that loyalty factor, whether it's driven by the comfort factor or whether it's just driven by an overall loyalty, that decrease in turnover really, really positively impacts companies, especially today, Jason, when talent is so hard to come by in this labor market.
Like, let's put this more on the court. How expensive is it to keep hiring new people every 6 months?
That's a great question, right? So turnover estimates are, and I just finished a proposal for another company that's a logistics company. The current estimate, so I know the up-to-date data, the current estimate in the distribution in the logistics world is that for every time somebody turns over, it costs a company $8,500 in the direct level piece. And then when you start to talk about, when you start to talk about high, It's right. And when you start to talk about other roles like IT and healthcare, depending on what level that job is at, turnover could be anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 every time somebody leaves a job. It is incredibly costly for a business.
So lower turnover is one huge benefit.
Yep.
What are some other big business benefits?
Yeah. So another benefit that studies and we see all the time is actually improved safety, right? People with disabilities tend to be safer.
You said improves safety.
Safety, yes. So there's studies that show, and we have seen this, that employees who have disabilities tend to be safer employees. They don't get hurt as much. They follow safety procedures more than other populations. It's a stereotype that businesses have that people with disabilities are going to get hurt, and it's actually research and practice shows the opposite. People with disabilities are safer workers.
Does research tell why?
So there's some different hypotheses on why that's the case, but one of the main hypotheses is that what we see, people with disabilities tend to reify, if you will, tend to really follow the rules, whether it's the human resource rules but they tend to take safety seriously. And that seriousness, it impacts their ability to be safe. They always think about the safety rules and how to be safe. But it also, one of the funny things, Jason, is we find that when companies start hiring people with disabilities, also their coworkers become safer because they watch how people with disabilities really pay attention to the safety protocols in a given company. So it actually just creates a safer environment, which again, lower turnover, better safety numbers are two parts of that key equation.
What you said brings up something else. How do people with disabilities typically positively impact a company culture?
Yeah, we call it the rally effect, right? We tend to see people in a current culture rally around a disability initiative and people with disabilities. And we think that happens for a couple of reasons. We think that nowadays, right, Jason, almost everybody I run into, if they're not a person with a disability themselves, they have somebody with a disability close in their life, right? A relative, a close friend. So that resonates when you go to work and you're supporting people with disabilities, whether it's a person, it's often a very personal issue, whether it's yourself or a relative. And so you advocate, right? So we see people rallying around this initiative. But the other thing that we see is people with disabilities, we tend to know how to overcome barriers, right? We don't get down. When a barrier is put in front of us, we're used to smashing it and getting through it, right? And that impacts the workplace culture when, everybody's like, oh, this is a bad job. This thing's, and then all of a sudden you see these individuals who are kind of smashing through that with a perspective of coming to work every day, happy and proud. It tends to impact the whole culture.
When you say rally around, I mean Indiana reference, but the movie Rudy and how the football team rallied around him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for that. That's a great bringing the rally effect to Indiana. I love it. Very good.
Another exciting question. I hope. How do And I guess we're doing broad strokes on this, obviously, but how do people with disabilities typically affect the quality of customer service?
Yeah, I mean, for your listeners out there, right? I bet you can think about the places that you go where you're served by people with disabilities, and I hear story after story, Jason, of customers that feel good about a business that employs people with disabilities, especially in visible positions, right? That we're not hiding people with disabilities in the back office or the back, right? People with disabilities are a part of that customer service process. And we really see an incredible story after story of, oh, this individual is working in the store or at the bank or anywhere in the community. And they typically, right, people with disabilities often go above and beyond for customer service. And it just resonates so well for businesses. And, one of the things I would ask your listeners to take a look at, for anybody who are football fans, right? Watch the Super Bowl commercials this year. And take note of how many people with disabilities are represented in those commercials, right? 6 years ago, 7 years ago, there were very few, Jason, right, represented. But the business community is starting to understand it is important to be. We are such a powerful customer community that both from a employee standpoint and a customer standpoint. So I think one of the things you will see is the active representation of so many people with disabilities in commercials. And I think that is progress for us in the business community as well.
This brings up, can you kind of walk us through a little bit, just briefly, like if a person like 30 or 40 years ago with a disability wanted a job, how would that reality have been different than the reality of job seekers with disabilities now?
So when you think about how far we've come, and we still have a long way to go to be fully disability inclusive as a workforce and as a work, but it's a great perspective to take us back. If you take us back 30 years to the late 80s, early 90s, right? When that was actually when my career was first started. And the way that we helped people with disabilities get jobs back then, Jason, is to play on the heartstrings of companies. Oh, this poor person with a disability, right? They can do something. You, as a good company, out of the goodness of your heart, right, can and the unemployment rates were through the roof, right? Because we as a community really didn't represent, and the folks who helped us get jobs didn't represent, and it was all about charity. It was all about, we used to call the job. There was a saying to help people get jobs with disabilities, we would use the terminology beg, place, pray. In other words, we'd go out and beg companies to hire people with disabilities. We just place people randomly, not based on their skills. And then we just pray it would work out, right? We would pray so we wouldn't have to do it again. And I think back to those days, and it's just such the opposite of the way that we approach it now from a skills-based standpoint. People with disabilities 30 years ago were unemployed and underemployed. And if they were employed, they were employed in positions that really took more pity and charity on them than really utilizing their strengths.
What contribute? I mean, I'm talking to one of the people who's contributed to this amazing change, and congratulations and thank you. And what else has contributed to this change in a relatively short period of time?
Well, I think that one of the things that has, there's been a couple of things. I think we have seen the fact that we have some great advocates out there. Like, I don't know if you've ever listened to Temple Grandin and some of the work that she's done for the autism community and the advocacy. And I think there have been some really great leaders on the disability community side. One of the unsung heroes, but I think he is recognized for what he did. But there's a gentleman named Randy Lewis, for those of you, and if his book is called No Greatness Without Goodness, and he was one of the leaders back in the early 2000s of the Walgreens initiative that really stepped out and said, we're going to employ people with disabilities at scale. So I think it really has been a combination of a couple things. It has been a combination of some very strong advocates in the disability community who have been able to advocate for people with disabilities. I think it also has been some, sorry about that background, it also has been some great business leaders who took the chance, if you will, to really evolve the way that companies think. And nowadays, Jason, I also think it's about need, right? It's about the fact that this labor market is incredibly strong in our country. Even if we're going into recession, it's still remaining really strong. And businesses are recognizing more and more that people with disabilities have skills, right? They're an untapped labor market. And so it's critical to get out and be able to recruit in our community to get a strategic advantage. So those are the combination of things that I think has really kind of started to move the needle. I'd love to say we're there. We probably won't get there in my career where we all should be, but hopefully my kids and our grandchildren will get into a world where disability isn't looked at anymore. It's just a part of human existence.
You see it, like what is your big dream beyond what would you like your grandchildren to experience or your great grandchildren to experience in their lives?
That there's no such thing as disability, right? That it's all just a spectrum of the human condition. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, right? And through technology and change in perspective, right? We all go through struggles, we all go through celebrations, right? And
we all go through struggles, we all go through celebrations.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I'd love to see a world where difference is recognized, but we don't need to have diagnoses anymore, right? We don't need to call it something. We just call it part of the condition. And I think you're starting to see some of that happen where there's, and it was also acknowledging, Jason, the pride. I also love the fact that though, that some communities, some disability communities are really from an identity first perspective, expressing pride in their disability, right? Folks that prefer the term autistics, right? Because they're proud of, they don't think autism creates a barrier. They're proud of that's part of them. And so I love to get away from, and I hope my grandchildren are in a world where if disability is a term, it's not looked at from a deficit or a negative standpoint. It's just part of the human existence.
Wow. Well, and to think of how much has been accomplished in the last 30 years, really gives us.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it gives us hope, right? It does give us hope that the needle has been moved, right? Especially in the workplace side of things, and it's a slow move, but I believe, because I know there are a lot of people listening to you who are still struggling with careers or being unemployed. So it's still going to be a journey, but we're starting to get there.
Wow. What led you into this type of work?
It's interesting because I was born without a left hand. So I was born with a visible disability, and so I grew up in where I was describing to you earlier. I grew up in a very small town in Wisconsin called Valders, Wisconsin, and the people surrounding me were very supportive, yet they held expectations for me, right? And what I needed to do. And I just thought that was the environment, right? I thought that was the world. Everybody with a disability was supported that way, right? But as I moved on to college, I really saw that the discrimination factor and the bias factor that was played into the disability community, and really. When I first went to the University of Wisconsin, I was a business major, but after seeing and after being able to understand a little bit more about the journey of job seekers with disabilities, I switched into disability and employment as a career, switched my major to rehabilitation counseling, which was, the ability to be able to work in the field of disability and employment. And I've never looked back, right? I've been super fortunate to be in the field of disability employment since I was 18 or 19 years old. And my personal goal is to work until 2037, which I have been in this field for 50 years and be able to retire after 50 years of being in this field. It's really been all I've known since I was 18, Jason.
Wow. What gave you the vision to start your own company?
It's a great question. For a very long time, I had the opportunity to work with great companies like Walgreens and Best Buy and watch the change. And I felt that if we started a consulting company that could help many companies with the change, right, that would have the most impact. And there are so many great workers that do what I do, that work on, if you will, the supply side of the equation, helping to do job training programs for people with disabilities, helping them to build careers from a counseling standpoint and all that. My skill set, I learned, is really on the demand side, right? Is helping helping companies to build confidence and to create inclusive environments. And so I thought the best way to have the most impact is to open a company that could work with corporations across the United States and the world to help them build more inclusive environments.
So cool. When you were talking about being a kid, you said there was a balance of support and expectation for that you succeed. Can you say more about providing the balance for people with disabilities? Because I mean, it seems like sometimes we just assume that people with disabilities can't do things, so we lower expectations.
Yep.
So far down that they don't have a chance to grow.
I think that is the biggest. That has been one of the biggest challenges of the disability, the inclusive community, whether we're talking about schools, the workplace, or other places in the community, is the decreased expectations that neurotypicals, right, that people with disabilities have of people without disabilities have of people with disabilities, right? And again, part of the human existence, if the expectations are decreased for you or the expectations are decreased for me, we probably are just going to live up to wherever those expectations are set. But if we keep our expectations high of people, if we don't say, early on in the world of disability employment, there were quote unquote disability jobs. These are we'll reduce the expectations for people with disabilities so they can work, right? Or we'll reduce when they need to show up. No, right? There's no such thing as disability jobs. There are jobs, and we set the expectations where they're at, and we expect people with disabilities to rise to that with the right support, right? With the correct support. And the assumption that people with disabilities are less than creates those decreased expectations, right? We have to wipe that assumption away and understand that people with disabilities need to be held to the same expectations, whether it's in school, whether it's at work, whether it's at sports, whether it's wherever where we exist, because people only thrive if the expectations are set high.
People only thrive if the expectations are set high. I can see some employers in schools being afraid if they set high expectations that will come across as insensitive or just downright mean. Well, what's the balance between setting high human expectations and setting inhumane expectations?
I think that's a great question. I mean, that's a great question. I think that, and that's true, right? That teachers or managers are worried if they set too high expectations that people with disabilities are going to fail, and then, oh boy, haven't they failed enough, right? But I think one of the things I would pay attention to, and if I was, giving advice to teachers or managers, is also that dignity of failure, right? That it's okay if somebody with a disability fails, right? Jason, how many times have you failed under the journey where you're at, right? How many times? I only learn from my failures. Ask my kids, ask my wife, right? The dignity of failure has to be present there for everybody, right, to eventually succeed. And we can't protect people from that, right? We shouldn't protect people from that. And as long as we're not setting expectations above what we would traditionally do for that student or for that worker, right, we're okay. Right now, if we're going to try to raise expectations even higher for some reason, well, then we start to talk about that might be mean or cruel or whatever. But if our expectations are in line with what that student should do in that class, or what that worker should do in that job, we're going to be okay, right? And we're also going to say to ourselves, because one of the assumptions that some of our companies, because they've heard, wow, people with disabilities don't turn over, right? So when we hire 50 people, we're going to have 50 people for a lifetime. No, that's not true either, right? That there are going to be some people who are going to fail, or there are going to be some people with disabilities who give attitude and need to be let go. But that's okay, right? Because again, that dignity of failure is there, and everybody has the opportunity to learn from that.
I've never thought about that quite the way, but the dignity of failure has probably, I would say it's been part of every successful person's journey.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. That you read or you look at anybody, disability or not, most of us learn best. I know I do best from my failures, right? And if we protect people from that, if we never give them a chance to fail, we're taking away a lot of learning opportunities.
Changing subjects a little bit. I'm a single man who doesn't have kids at the moment, so I want to ask, what do you love about being a father?
What do I love about being a father? Well, there's so many. That's a good question. There's so many answers to that. I really think being able to see your kids succeed, right? We talk about success and failure, but see your kids find the things that they love to do and succeed in those, but also being there for the journey, right? Being there for when your family as a whole is struggling, or a specific kid is struggling, being able to support them through that, right? It really is. I guess my favorite part is that connection, and I think a lot of parents out there would say the same thing, right? I take so much pleasure in watching my kids succeed, whether it's on a grand stage or it's on just a very small accomplishment they've overcome. It's the best feeling in the world. It's better than succeeding yourself. Millions times better than succeeding yourself. And that's what I love about being a parent.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. What would you say about having a disability from birth to someone who hasn't experienced that?
It's interesting because as my youngest, one of the things my youngest daughter, as she has grown up and noticed, right, she will, when we walk through a store or we walk through the mall or we walk, she'll notice people looking or taking double takes, right, at my hand, right, and I think what I would say is that you just have to walk with your head up, right? I guess it goes back to my grandmother, who we were talking before the show, that there were times when I was a preteen or a teen, especially if I go away from my community and go somewhere else, that I try to tuck my arm in my jacket so nobody could see that I was missing, right? And she was always telling me, get that arm out of your jacket and keep your head high, smile, and let's go, right? And that's really something that I've learned. The other piece that I would say that I have learned about my journey, and it's different for everybody, I understand that, but there typically are two types of different situations, Jason, when I'm out in the community. It is, one situation is a child will come up to me and say, "What happened to your hand?" Right? And the parent will run over and the parent will let me answer the child, will let me describe and give my perspective and let them know what happened to my hand. And then the second situation is a child will come up and say, "What happened to your hand?" And the mom will or dad will feel offended and yank the child away before I get a chance to answer, right? And I think all of us, but me particularly, right, I love giving that chance to answer, right? So we don't continue. The parent that yanks that child away, it just continues to mystify disability, right? To somehow, enforce that message of that we should be ashamed of it or we shouldn't be asking about it, right? I love people who are out and open about their disability. I love people who have a sense of humor about their disability, right? And there are my kids will tell you, right, that there are things that I can't do because of missing a left hand, and we sometimes laugh about it. I know that sometimes it's like, wow, you really laugh about it, but it's just part of the human condition. It's part of who I am, and the more open we can be, the better. But it took me a time to learn that, right? And the last thing I'll say about that, Jason, is that for me, as a person with a physical disability, a visible disability, I basically disclose everywhere I go, right? But that's a different journey than somebody who has an invisible disability like a mental health condition or autism or a learning disability, because their choice is very different on how and when to disclose their disability. So the journey is individual, but for me, I prefer that openness and that candor.
So if you personally met someone at a networking event, what would you say to disclose your disability?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I will talk about my disability, whether it's an event or or a training, right, that I do, a disability awareness training. I really just am honest and say that I was born without a left hand. Sometimes I talk about my journey where I used to wear a prosthesis when I was young, a kind of a hook prosthesis. And there was a time when I tried out some mechanical hands on my left hand. But, this is who I am, right? And this is how I've learned to cope. And so I often will talk about that. I will often talk about that. This is, my disability is a part of me I'm proud of. It doesn't define me, but it's a part of me. And we'll talk about from that perspective in terms of my history. But again, recognizing that, Jason, the person I may be talking to may, for example, have a history of mental health that they're trying to figure out if they should be disclosing at work or not. So you always want to be sensitive to that individual journey.
If someone were to meet you and you just started a conversation, what would be an appropriate way they could ask about you having no hand, and what would be an offensive way?
So That's a great question. I think somebody just saying, tell me a little bit more about your disability, or what, I don't mind the question, what happened to your hand or what happened to your arm? I think, excuse me, I think the most offensive thing to me is assuming, and I don't know if this is for you or some of your listeners who have disabilities. The thing isn't necessarily about asking me about my disability. It's when people assume I can't do something, right, because of my disability. For me, that's the most offensive thing, right, is they assume that I can't do something. An example I use in some of my trainings is I wasn't selected as one of the baseball coaches for one of my son's little league teams, and I found out later it was because they couldn't believe a person with one hand could coach kids on how to play baseball, right?
What?
And that was so frustrating, right, for me, because I played baseball when I was growing up, and I know a lot about baseball, and I pride myself on that. But so for me, it's, if somebody's going to be open and honest, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do that. Where I get concerned is when people make assumptions about what I can, and especially what I can't do.
I definitely can relate to that, because if someone hears my voice, could indicate something having to do with level cognition, or something having to do with a stroke, or
Yep.
or they could assume I was intoxicated. It's easy to make those assumptions, but good to follow that up with, I'm not sure. I should ask. I should be curious about this, maybe.
Yes, I think being open more and more in today's, right? Like you said, somebody makes that assumption about you and doesn't understand that you are, what was this, episode 123? Is that what you said? You host this awesome podcast. And
Actually, only 122. I'm kind of a slacker. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. But, and right, it's just, we just have to help people. One of the things we do in our training is don't assume, right? Ask questions, be open, but don't make assumptions about what people can and can't do.
So it seems kind of automatic to make how can we avoid making assumptions? Or how do you teach people to avoid making assumptions, I guess?
So typically we see assumptions come from everybody's own personal fear and stigma, right? And the way, in my opinion, what we have found is the way to teach people not to make assumptions is to understand that every one of us have our own fear and stigma. And the only way that we're going to try to stop making assumptions is to be able to talk about that fear and stigma, right? Anybody, one of the things I love is I hear from certain people with disabilities who say, well, I have a disability, so I don't make any assumptions about anybody with a disability. I don't know, right? I find that hard to believe, right? Because I think the recognition that we all make assumptions. I don't want people to assume things about me, but the truth is there are times when I look at somebody based on some characteristic and I make an assumption, right? And I have to be open and willing to challenge that. And what's the fear and stigma behind that? And then we can start challenging assumptions. And in the workplace, we do a thing with some of our companies, Jason, called fear and stigma discussions. And the goal is to ask people to be honest about their fears and stigma so we can help them as a group of managers start to challenge some of those assumptions.
The idea caused me to breathe deeper. Fear and stigma discussions. Why not just get everyone to get to actually talk about fear and stigma, so can grow past that limiting perspective.
Yep.
From
That'd be great, right? If we could all have open places where we could talk about our fear and stigma, we'll still make assumptions, but we'll reduce some of them, right? We'll reduce some of those assumptions.
in the ripple effect of reducing an assumption can be huge. An assumption could be keeping us from a friendship, from a work relationship, from all sorts of things.
Absolutely, absolutely, right. Every day in the workplace, assumptions are made that if you could challenge them a bit, you'd have more colleagues, more friendship, and a better culture.
So one of the things I talk about in my work is the power of doing our imperfect best, and what that means to me is we have a vision of the best we want for our lives, and we go for it. But when mistakes, obstacles, hindrances come up, instead of using them as an excuse to stop, we learn from them and continue towards the best. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, James Emmett?
That's a great terminology. I like that, imperfect best. I think that means for me reaching setting obtainable goals, and again understanding that towards those goals there's going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, right? Theoretically, again, that nothing worth doing is going to be perfect to get there, right? And so I've learned that so much in setting up and leading a company, right? I'm a good disability inclusion consultant, but I'm kind of a crappy CEO right now, and I'm getting better, right? But it really has been an imperfect journey for me to understand what it takes to be a leader in a small business and be able to do that. But it's a journey I'm proud of, because all the lessons I've learned from the failures are making me better, right? Are making our company better. And then really that's, I think, my vision of imperfect best is embracing, setting the goal, and then embracing the journey, both successes and failures.
Powerful, powerful. How can people? Is the best way to connect with you through your website?
Yeah, if you go to jamesemmettandcompany.com, you can connect. If you Google me, Jason, if you just Google James Emmett Disability, you'll be able to find a lot of my work, a lot of my writings, and then be able to get in direct contact with me. I actually the phone I have right here, the cell phone I have right here is on many of our websites. So I do get contacts from people from time to time asking questions. Thank you for putting. There's actually there's 2 T's in the James Emmett, but that everything else is perfect. And
okay, as take 2, that was a learning opportunity.
Imperfect best, right? No worries, right? But yes, jamesemmettandcompany.com or Google James Emmett and disability. And I am out there and I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're a job seeker, if you're a company, sometimes we can do some things. Thank you. Sometimes we can do some things. Sometimes we can't, but we can get you the resources.
Great. Any final words to as humans as we navigate this life and try to grow more comfortable with the differences around us and the differences within ourselves?
Yeah, what I would say is our community needs leaders like you, Jason. It is the ones that embrace the experience and come out and talk about it on a regular basis. Congratulations to you that your leadership and again, I love the imperfect best and the awkwardly awesome kind of methodology. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, James. It's been an honor to talk with you for an hour. And thanks for all you've created and have helped so many people. So, last thing, you've helped connect over 100,000 people with jobs.
Yep.
A huge number. That's
In all of our projects, right? That's why it's fun working on the demand side, because we can create lots of opportunities with companies once as they start creating those cultures.
that's goosebumpy cool. Thank you.
Goosebumpy cool. I like that.
Oh my gosh. I love this part of the week. And I just learned so much in the last hour, and I hope you did too. One of the things I learned is I think I'm pretty open and pretty good at checking my assumptions and everything, but there's still more to do. Even when we think we're good at something, there's still more to learn and still more ways to grow, and that's part of what makes life exciting. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're watching this live on replay, and see you next week with another amazing guest. Take care. Take care. Find your outro, Jason. Find your outro. Okay.